House. Pretty excited. Another thing out up north, Denver, Colorado. I know a lot of people, and if anybody reads the articles that I write, which I hope somebody does at some point, we've gone over how a lot of this bourbon, people have this misconception that bourbon can only be made in Kentucky, which is not the case. It can be made anywhere in the U.S. And while Kentucky has a good variation of temperatures, so do other places throughout the country. Other places have some unique characteristics that we don't get in Kentucky, just like Kentucky has unique characteristics. And we're starting to see a lot of really good bourbon come out of just a wide variety of areas. So I am very, very excited to have you on, Alan. Thank you for coming here and meeting with us.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Let's go ahead and roll intro, and then we'll get into the story of how you got into whiskey and the story of Laws.
Perfect.
All right, my friend. So let's just get right into the meat of this. I know, super cool intro reel, right? I told you it was cheesy.
I liked it.
I put it, so right before we did our first Whiskey Wednesday, I put that together in like 30 minutes, and I was like, good enough. And it just kind of stuck.
It stuck.
So let's go through here and tell us a little bit about how you got started. How did you get started here with Laws, and how did this whole thing come about?
Sure, I could tell you a story about passion for whiskey, but I'm not going to use that word. I'm going to use obsessed. So I'm a whiskey obsessed person that at one point decided that I wondered if I could make my own whiskey from all the amazing whiskeys that I've had and tried, and could I put together something that has all the elements of what I'm looking for in whiskey. So that's how it started out. And I started drinking whiskey when I was like 16, and it's kind of really what I drank. And I grew up in Canada, so don't judge too much on that. It's a lot more liberal up there for this kind of stuff. But it started out with Jack Daniels, and I've drank my way through a number of different types of whiskey, and bourbon's pretty much my favorite, and rye whiskey, being Canadian, is pretty important to me too. So it started out as like a small journey towards something, and could you do it was the first question. And, I spent a lot of time in oil and gas finance for a very long time. And I was burned out on that and didn't want to die at my desk. And I wanted to do something where I used my hands and made something. And it got to a point where I'm like, can I do this? And spent about, I'm going to say like 4 to 5 years in reading everything under the rainbow. Learning a whole bunch about technicals. I'm from oil and gas and oil services in particular. So there's a lot of technicals there anyway. So that fit in quite well on the equipment side. And then, started out on how do I go and do this? And so I took a trip to Kentucky to see how it's done on big scale. And I met a great guy who was retired, and he was my Yoda and taught me how to put some of the soul in it. I could tell you everything about why I was doing something. I didn't even show you a formula. And he just looked at me like, son, this business is built by people with a grade 8 education. You don't be needing bringing no formula into this.
I love the Yoda reference because I'm a total Star Wars buff. So
oh, perfect. Well,
anyone who's ever met me knows that in like the first 10 seconds of me.
Well, and it's a real good description too, because he never answered a question without another question, ever. He didn't just tell me stuff. He'd ask, well, what do you think? I think this. He goes, well, what about this? I'm like, well, if I had that, I would think this. So it was a great learning experience. And come back to, I used to work in New York, in Brooklyn, and I moved to Colorado. And we were looking to do this in New York, actually. Thank God we moved. It would be so much more expensive to do what we do now there. And we wouldn't be able to do all the cool things that we do out here in Denver, that I would have been, had been restricted to do that in New York. So we came out here and looked for a place and started, building out the distillery and getting the permits to do it. Pretty exciting time. We run on a 500-gallon system. We just got a new still last week, actually. It's a 2,000-gallon. which we won't be able to hook up for 3 or 4 months given permits. But our whole idea was to make whiskey. I don't make any white spirits. We don't make, anything that doesn't need a barrel to age. And we were going to do it in a way that paid homage to the fact that, Bill Friel, my Yoda, said, I'm not going to help you unless you're going to do it the right way. And I'm like, oh, we're going to do it the right way. We're not taking any shortcuts.
Well, it's really cool that really just so you guys sent me a couple of samples here to check out. And one of the things that struck me right off the bat is just the care that went into even these samples. Because, I got to say, I do a lot of samples. I do a lot of reviews, and I get a lot of these in. And, if somebody sends me a sample, it's a little 2 milliliter bottle with a label slapped on it. And like you guys have these pre-done samplers with, with the foil, and they match the bottle, and there's etching. And I mean, it really is just,
we do everything the right way.
Little details that
everything matters. And that detail that you're seeing there goes into the whiskey. And so the whiskey deserves to go into cool bottles and everything else that go around our branding, because we care enough about those things. Every single thing we care about, from where the grain comes from, who grew the grain is a big deal to us. Where the glass comes from, we go see our bottles get made. Just because if you don't, there's all these things that really do matter. And no shortcuts is like a trademark thing for me. It's on my arm. There are no shortcuts. Like
well, that is a motto to live by. So when I put that hashtag no shortcuts, I mean, that was some serious stuff right there.
It's real. And that's not just me. We have a village of people that make this. This is how we describe what we do. We don't even have a head distiller, because our production team, my production team, if you run the equipment, you are the head distiller. You're accountable to everybody. So that's the culture that we have at Law's Whiskey House. It's accountability culture and about quality. And we care about every little element that goes into our process. And it's a rewarding thing when you do it that way. We didn't sell a bottle of whiskey for 3.5 years. We made whiskey for 3.5 before we sold our first bottle. And we've been selling it now we're in our 7th year. So we're 9.5 years old right now. So we started on July 4th, 2011, born on the 4th of July, like a good Canadian. But we've been going since then. And we've been progressively raising the bar on ourselves. The question we often get is things like, well, what's your best whiskey ever made? I'm like, well, we made it actually today. I don't mean that as a funny little quib. It's true. Every time we make something, we make it better. And we've been able to improve even on the things that we thought were great. We keep getting better. What's the first one you want to try?
So I actually I went ahead and took the liberty of pouring the 4-grain straight bourbon, the 2-year.
So I have that with me here as well, and you'll have this in your. It's most likely batch 20 that's in it, and this is what this one is.
It's interesting on the nose when you get something that's so incredibly young, right? I get none of that ethanol sweet corn type of. It's almost like so I'm used to that ethanol-y corn, but this is almost like a creamed corn.
Yeah, so this is a 4-grain recipe. So we started out with this. It's our flagship, and the reason here is I wanted not just a wheated bourbon or a high rye. I wanted I wanted them all. I wanted to have it all in every sip. And in this took a while to perfect, but in every sip you're going to get all 4 American mother grains. The sweetness of the corn is right there at the beginning, but we use only 60% corn, so it's going to have more flavored grains in it, and it's going to be a little drier than most bourbon. And we're not trying to make Kentucky bourbon. They make it awesome. I'm trying to make something different here, and I want to bring all those grain flavors forward. The next part of the sip, you should probably get the little bit of a bite, which is kind of penny metallic, I would call it. And it's the rye, right? That's the rye. And then it should roll over into kind of like rising bread dough, very doughy. And that's the wheat. And we use a white wheat. It's an heirloom variety grown.
Yeah, I get that. It's almost like, you know what it reminds me of? And this is kind of, I hope this is not offensive to you guys in any way, but it is meant as the greatest of compliments. It reminds me of the dough that you get from mellow mushroom. I don't know if you guys have a mellow mushroom up there, but they've down here in the South, we've got this like organic whole pizza place. Like it's a holistic, organic, all of top quality ingredients. And their pizza crust is, I mean, dude, I've had pizza in Italy, the place. It's the best pizza crust I've ever had anywhere. And it's like, it's almost that nice, organic, like rich, doughy taste to it in like the best way.
We call it more like a cinnamon bun rising in the kitchen with butter on it, because it has all those baking spice notes too that come through, like cardamom, cinnamon. Those are all there. And the finish should be really nutty. Once you have a couple sips, you'll get the nuttiness, like hazelnuts or walnuts. So obviously the sweetness is corn. The rye is giving it the bite, and that rye kind of, sarsaparilla kind of notes to it, and the like the saltiness. And then the wheat is a big player in this. And this is like 20% wheat. So 60% corn, 10 rye, 20 wheat, and 10 barley. And all three of the flavor grains are heirloom variety, only grown here. So we're using like scarlet barley, and we're using Centennial white wheat, and we're using SLV rye that's only grown in San Luis Valley. And it's, for like 75 years. And it's a very distinctive winter rye. But all those flavors come through in every sip. That's what a 4-grain should be. Our beginnings, we had trouble with that because the rye, even at 10%, would take over the flavor profile. It's a bully grain. It's what ryes are. They're very strong. And so we had to tame that. We did that through the cooking technique more so than by reducing it in the recipe. Because we use an inverted stepped infusion method when we cook stuff too. So we go up to high temps and reduce temp and add the grains where they maximize their flavor profile. It's like a beer technique, but it's an inversion of that. And again, we're looking for grain flavor. We want to taste the grains. We want you to have distinctive flavors here with highlights of wood. And we don't use small barrels. We only use large format 53-gallon barrels. Chartreuse, those are our primary. We've kind of trickled in some kind of wave stave, independent stave, things that we haven't put out yet, but it's adding an extra little layer of coconut is what we're looking for in those barrels. And those will make their way into our batch recipes here. Well, in our batch bottlings, I guess is how I should say that, in the next year. Those are now hitting the 3.5 years. I know those bottles that you have, they'll say aged at least 2 years on them. We do that just because that's the TTB standard, but there's nothing in there that isn't at least 3.5 years old. In fact, the ones in the wheat and the malt ones that we put out in a 4-pack are actually 4 years old, and they're the same whiskey we use in our bonded wheat and our bonded malt whiskey. It's a way to put high quality in your hand in a small format so that you're not, when you're making an investment in a premium whiskey, make sure you like it. And those bottles we gave you, those are pretty good, right? Like they're 100 ml, so you get 2 full-size drinks out of them.
Well, that's excellent, man. Let's move on to this rye, which I'm kind of excited to try.
Mm-hmm.
I tried my hardest to wait for this, and I did, and I'm kind of wishing I'd dove into it sooner.
So our rye whiskey it does really well if you care about competitions and things like that. And in the World Whiskey Awards, we definitely end up really high. We've won the world's best rye a couple years ago, and we've won the American category under 11 years old a couple times. There's no other rye like this. This is a heavy rye, and it's got super amounts of flavor. And this is all the elements of a good rye, right? It's got saltiness, it's got the peppery notes, but our peppery notes aren't like cracked pepper, white pepper, black pepper, those when you're cracking it over your food and stuff. It's not as peppery that way. It's more like Serrano. We're in the middle of the country, kind of southwest, and where this rye grows, it's picking up a lot of the elements of the soil it's grown in, and it gives it that nice radiant heat, radiant peppery notes. It's like Serrano pepper, and we think that's one of the best elements of it. And then, you'll get the rest of the caramelly kind of flavors, the salt, more like salt caramel. but has all the things, the heat. Best part about a rye is by the third sip, you can start to loosen your collar a little. And then by the end of the first glass, you can feel it in your heartbeat. It's like the symbiote in Spider-Man. It just gets on you and starts to take control. So, but it's not, this, the ones you're drinking are 95.5, and that's early. So it's about 4 years old. That's what's in it. And the batches we have out now are 100%. And we've used 5% barley in the past when we were starting out to make sure that we got the conversions in basically when you're mashing and cooking, you're making a starch pudding and you need the malts to turn that starch into sugar. And so we've used malt, a little bit of malt in the past, but of the rye proportion, it's actually half malted rye as well. So it's malted rye and raw rye. So that's giving it a really cool, I think, long finish. And it pops the sweetness a little bit too.
I do have to say, this is, I mean, for the amount of time that it's aged, this rye is phenomenal.
Thank you.
It is, I mean, I see the malted rye in there. I see, I mean, so there, I tell people there's really three kinds of ryes. And in my opinion, there's three main categories of ryes. And there are people that will swear by it, and there are people that just completely disagree with me. And I'm cool either way. But there's earthy ryes, spicy ryes, spiced ryes, and then there's funky ryes. Those are the three. And this is, it kind of exists in the middle of the complex, which is, it's interesting because I normally see a rye pull one way. The older the rye is, the more it starts to kind of wiggle towards the funky side. But this is, I mean, this is really balanced. If you had blind picked me or not shown me this bottle and told me go ahead and give me an age, I would have said 5, 4 or 5 years, 5 years. It really reminds me of the same age level as a lot of the 5-year-old elks. Like just when it comes to how much of that rye is given way to age and kind of mellowed it. And it's incredible that you guys are doing this in, what is it, like 2 to 3 years, and you're making it taste 5 years plus.
Well, we have a 2-year version that's for on premise. It's for cocktail, and then we have our regular batch rye, which I have one sitting here.
Is it the 6 year?
It's 4 years old, and it's over. We call it over 3, but it's basically everything's over 4 years old. And then there's the bonded rye, which is over 6 years old.
Oh, I got that one here too.
Oh, that one's is that already empty?
No, it's actually, I just opened it.
Oh, okay. I like the way it turned there, like, oh, it's already gone. No,
hold on, I'll be with you in a second.
But the bonded rye is going to start you're going to get a lot more barrel influence on it, but it definitely pulls in some of the high notes, and those high notes bring it to more in balance. It gets more integrated is the word I use. And there's not a lot like it. As a standalone whiskey, whether it's rye, bourbon, or anything, it's a really high quality whiskey. And then it happens to be made from rye. And like I said, this rye varietal that we're using is very distinctive. And it's, then the farmers who grow it just for us. So they've just harvested, like last month, they finished, actually it's probably 2 months ago now, 600,000 pounds of it that we have to get through this coming year.
Man, that is crazy. That does not drink at 100 proof. And
no, that's another thing too. Most of our whiskeys we don't put anything out at 80. So everything's higher proof, 95 plus typically. And they don't taste like that. So they can be pretty dangerous. I have right here with me, so I'm going to have another sip of, because one of our staff, our longtime members, it's his rye barrel. So, and it's over 6 years old, and it's cast strength. And this stuff, you would think at 130 proof that it would take the barn doors off, but it doesn't. It sits really nice, but you can't get through the second glass very quickly. It's a beautiful rye.
You know what's crazy about this 100 proof is that, I mean, it drinks closer to, I would say, a 90. It drinks closer to a 90 proof, maybe even less. I mean, it's smoother. It's like drinking a really smooth 90. But it doesn't sacrifice on flavor. It's got a lot of, even with the rye, it's got a little bit more rye spice, but not spicy than the one that I tried before. But it's more of that, like a little bit of a more bold rye spice, but you get a lot of that earthiness to it, and a lot of like almost like a malty caramel sweetness.
It's salted caramel. It's like,
yeah, salted caramel. That would be it. I mean, you smell it, and it smells like something I would get at Disney holiday, some Disney holiday confection, and it is freaking good, man.
Yeah, it has the heat. It's got the mint notes. It's got the anise, the licorice, sarsaparilla. Sometimes but it has all those notes.
Sarsaparilla for sure.
Yeah.
A little bit of that star anise, black licorice, but like in an undertone of it. It's not overpowering.
No.
Yeah, that's good.
So it's so the rye is I guess you call it our secondary flagship, and it's the one that is the most distinctive, and it's the one that we shock the most people with when they try it. It's like, oh my God, yeah, this is, and we're pretty proud of that. And it's the 4-year version, the 6-year version, and then cast strength are the 3 that are the prime, the way we look at it. We put out an experiential one just this last month. There's a few cases, maybe 20 cases of it left. That was rye whiskey finished in a Colorado malt whiskey barrel.
You have 21 cases. One of those cases is mine, right? No,
we can make that happen. Yes.
No, but so let's go on, man, to this 4 grain. I'm the 6+ year 4 grain.
Yeah.
This is something that people can get out and about.
Yeah, it's limited in sense of there's only 1,000 cases of it every year. So, and that next round, we call it batch 4, comes out in February, late February, as well as the 6-year-old rye, which is actually 1,000 cases as well. And it's only available. And then when they're gone, they're gone. But from February on, it's usually used to stick around longer than it has recently. We're sold out in Colorado right now of both. So that's something's never happened to us before.
Really?
So, yeah, there'll be 3 months before it's available again in market, which it's good for us. I think it shows that people are paying attention. 6 is a good year for our bonded stuff. I think you'll see stuff older than that coming in the few years. And we put out a 9-year-old bourbon single barrel here in Denver, Colorado for Christmas season, and it's gone. It went in, I think, a day. So and it was our oldest ever we put out. And so that's the thing we're moving towards, is like more special releases and things where we might have 2-3 barrels of it, and we want you to have the experience that we have, and we're geeky about all this stuff. So when we do an experiential barrel that's finishing like Calvados or something, we spent a lot of time on it, and they'll spend a year, 2 years in a French oak Calvados, previously used Calvados barrel or port or something. We have those as well. That's part of what keeps us engaged in all this, because we're geeks and we want to know a lot more about the stuff. So,
and our legs for days.
Oh yeah. It's funny to call legs in whiskey, right? But it does. And those are the oils. The rye has so much. And then the 6-year-old bourbon, having spent a lot more time in oak, it's definitely that nature too. I think our 6-year-old bourbon right now, the ones that have met these bond categories over the last 3, has like a cool banana like ester in it too.
Yeah. It's like a sweet, like, okay, so this is going to sound really, really crazy, but maybe not. But like it reminds me of like and I had some today, so that might be what I'm thinking. But I had like a sweet corn casserole, and it was so good. But this is like a sweet corn casserole had a baby with banana nut bread.
Yeah.
And it's really good.
The white spirit going into the barrels, especially rye, smells like banana bread when it hits the char. So it's like these are things that you have to coax out of the whiskey, and it's how you make your cuts. And everyone thinks, oh, the head cut, you just do it at this, and it doesn't taste bad. It's like, no, you're looking for these little lenses. For us on the bourbon, it's like a pear apple lens. That's where we'll make our heads cut. We want that. And it might only be 2 cups in 200 gallons, but after 3 or 4 years, that matters. So apple notes come through in our bourbon a lot. And we're shooting for that because we want those notes. And cherry comes through as once you hit around the 6-year level, the cherry punches through more. Our first bonded bourbons were 4 years, and our bonded rye was 4 year. Those are discontinued. There's some, they're collector's items, I guess now. But I really like the 4-year bonded bourbon because it didn't have as much wood in it, so the cherry wasn't as pronounced. But the grain, the fruitiness of the grain, and all that's what we're going for. We're trying to give you grain flavors, not overpowered by wood.
Dude.
Not bad, right? I'm glad you like it. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And
listen, I cut through 200 pours a year. On a conservative side, and I know you and we were talking collections, and I thought I was crazy with my collection. And then I found out that you're my spirit animal, and you have like double my collection after COVID.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I'm trying to drink mine down, but it hit it somewhere near 600, and it's definitely below 400 now. And
dude,
our neighbors,
is such a trooper, man. My wife is such a trooper. She'll see stuff come in, and she'll see a new box of like samples come in, and I know, like, I've got 2 bookshelves full of whiskey, this whole thing full of whiskey, like 4 or 5 boxes full of whiskey.
Absolutely. I know this feeling. And then you have to buy special pieces of furniture for it.
Yeah. The crazy thing is she's not a big whiskey person. So, like, I get all of this stuff in, and it's taking over the house, and, she's very, very supportive, which I appreciate.
We like to try, we call the collect, I have a special room in the house. It's all really nice. And our whole production team, we use it as a library, a flavor library, to say, hey, why does this whiskey have this element that we really like? And how do you think they got that? We kind of dwell on those things and like get together. What do you think? It's recipe based? Is it like technique? What was it? Yeast? So we go through this, and we use that because we're always trying to get better, right? Our logo, you see our logo, right? Oh, I have that on my arm too. All right. So it's infinity, right? Up and down. It's time crossed with multiple processes, art, technique. And that's where our whiskey, it's like, we always are trying to get better, and we always pay homage to time, because time matters in whiskey. Anyone that tells you it doesn't is wrong. And it doesn't mean that age is everything, but it's something. I'll tell you that. To say that, a 4-year isn't something better than something that's 6 months old. Like you're saying earlier, something young, it just doesn't have the elements of whiskey yet. And we had to wait a long time. We're a little bit lucky here in Colorado, because what might take 5 years or 6 years, and I think 6 to 9 in Kentucky is the absolute sweet spot for bourbon. I love that stuff. I don't need to go to 15 because I love that's amazing. But in Colorado, it's less time, because we have the same temperature swings. We're in a desert. We're an upper mountain desert, right? But we're right against the mountains here. So the barometric pressure swings make our barrels pump like a heart, because it doesn't go slow when it goes up and down. It happens erratically during the day. It even affects our distillation runs. We know if something's supposed to take 6 hours and we're 5.5 in and we're not even close, you just go pull up the barometric pressure on the computer. You can see, high pressure system in, it's pushing down, and we're like maybe 3-4 PSI top of column. Well, that extra pressure makes the run take an extra 1.5 hours.
So is that because of the elevation?
Yeah. Elevation and nestling against the mountains.
Nobody talks about that. Why does nobody talk about that? So all we hear is about the temperature in Kentucky. Why does no one talk about the elevation and the pressure? I've been doing this for years, and I've never heard anyone say that. And I've met tons of people from Colorado, tons of distillers. Actually, I'd like to make a trip up there pretty soon because I've got so many people that are like, if you're ever up here, swing in. Definitely. And I've never heard anyone talk about that. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so barometric pressure. So when you think about, you put the liquid in the barrel, you tap in the bung, it's sealed, right? It breathes, because we all know about the angels, taking their share, but it breathes in a restricted way, right? Yeah. So there's a temperature and there's a pressure, and then when those pressures change dramatically, and they do here a lot, and I mean this, I don't mean just for, hey, these 2 days it went up. I mean, in the next 2 hours, it can shoot up. And by doing that, it creates a pressure gradient difference, and it makes the whiskey want to push into the wood further. And because when we pop these bungs, like they puff, like there's pressure in them, and you add the heat, and the heat differential is very important, but it's only important seasonally, right? Like,
real quick, Jim loves bourbon, and Jim, we love you.
Definitely, Jim. So it creates these the situation where we get more out of the barrels earlier. So all those wood chemicals and substances are in our bourbon sooner, and we get a tremendous amount of color. You can look at the bourbon, and even Bill Friel, my mentor, he was when I first sent him samples at 2, he's like, "Where'd this come from?" I'm like, "Well, these are the whiskeys." He's like, "No way, because 2-year whiskey in Kentucky doesn't look anything like this." And it's like, well, this is how our operating environment is, that it's creating this. And it's not just us, like other Colorado whiskeys have this as well. Like, you just get a lot out of the barrels. That's why I'm not a big fan of small barrels or things like that. People do what they want to do. I don't like those. But if you did those in Colorado, it would just turn into toothpicks pretty quick, because you're going to extract a lot. And when we look at the red line in our barrel staves, after 4 years, like we're fairly deep. We're like over halfway into the wood. The red line's in a stave. When you look on it on the side, it's this line that shows you how deep the whiskey went into the wood. Well, ours goes really deep, really quickly, and that's because of the pressure gradient change. And we get all the same heat and things, and we heat our warehouses, so we never fall below 60. So our barrels are always working. They're not going to go fallow when they fall low, because heat and chemical reactions is important, right? So if the barrels are warm, then they're continually active. If they're cold, they're not active, and that's okay too. That gives them a rest, and they do different things. And I was always taught that, in Kentucky, it wasn't years, how many summers some barrels saw. And that's important. And I totally understand what that is after years. We did experiments with using containers, and we put our barrels in the containers through the summer, and in our high desert kind of conditions, we get to 115 degrees in those containers. Those barrels were pretty sweet.
Dude, that's awesome. So that's crazy, just how those peaks in pressure change the way the whiskey moves in and out. And so it almost it treats it, I mean, it's similar but different to those temperature fluctuations in Kentucky. And so you're saying it goes, not only do you guys get those temperature fluctuations, but then you have temperature shifts based on the elevation that further changes the way that the whiskey. That's so interesting. And that might be why some of that bourbon that you have coming out of the north is so darn good, because classically we've thought, Kentucky's the place, it's the temperature. And now you guys have something totally unique to yourselves, that you have temperature swings, but now you also have these pressure swings that changes every aspect of the whiskey and makes it its own thing and makes it unique.
It is. It's definitely an environmental influence, and we use the word terroir. It's a wine word. If people go, "Oh, that's not for whiskey," it absolutely is whiskey.
I just had legs for days. You're safe with me.
That's right. Exactly right. But you have grain has terroir, where it's grown, the type of varietal matters, and then how it's made. The natural yeast. We're using open air fermentation. We're definitely following traditional standards. We're not trying to cut corners in any way, and we're definitely using open air, double distilled. Everything we make is sour mash, whether it's rye. Our rye is all sour mash rye. Our wheat whiskey is too. Even even our malt whiskey that we make is on grain. So most do not make it that way. It's not, and that adds a whole bunch of extra elements to it. But then you add to that, the water we use to go into the barrel is mineral water from Colorado. It's El Dorado Springs.
Well, it seems like we're not the only people that appreciate it, man. Shout out to Whiskey Straight Up. Thanks for watching. They seem to like it too, and they are another great whiskey outlet. If you're following us and not following them, you should also be following them. So,
well, thank you all. That's really good.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like you guys have quite a bit of fans.
Well, we're hoping. Yeah, we've been doing it for 9.5 years, and we are growing fairly decently, and we are entering the Florida market very soon in 2021.
Well, that's exciting. We're out of Tampa, so we're looking forward to it and sharing it with our partners because, I mean, it's good stuff, man, and I get sent a lot of young stuff.
Yeah.
And some of it's all right. Some of it's.
The thing that I say to people, because they'll ask what I think of certain whiskey or that one, and it's like I've never really had a whiskey I wouldn't drink. It's just what I would prefer more or less, and it does depend on time of year and all this sort of stuff. And sometimes I can really get after a young 2-year-old whiskey in the summer. It's got maybe a used barrel, so it's almost like it's like a nicely oxidized and aged moonshine. It goes good with a beer. So there's a lot of different ways to try stuff. I'm a big fan of a lot of the craft spirits business and the established stuff. Like obviously with the collection that I have, like I'm interested in it, and it's part of our journey, right? Like how we go about doing. Yeah. And I know you asked me earlier before we got on about what I do, and I don't use the term I very much because it isn't. We really do run it like a village. It don't matter if you're in administration or you're in sales or you're in production or if you're on the bottling line. Everyone contributes something to this, and that's the nature of our culture. So we have a lot of obsessive people in our culture.
Well, that is very cool, man. Well, listen, man, I appreciate, and it's interesting. I usually try to keep these things at exactly 30 minutes, but I've just had such a good time talking to you. The whiskey's been so great. I mean, just your insight has been phenomenal. The passion that you share has been great. I have had a great time talking to you. I would love to have you on again here in the near future if you guys are interested.
I would love to come on. I would bring on some of our production people too if you want to get geeky and get
questions. Let's do that. I would love to, because a lot of the people here, they love to hear the technical side of it. So that would be phenomenal. But man, thank you so much for being on. Guys, if you have not heard of Law's Whiskey or gotten to try it, Denver, Colorado, man, it is phenomenal. It is very good stuff. Even their younger stuff drinks significantly older than it is. It's very, very good. Alan, thank you for sharing your passion and your story with us and the story of Law's Whiskey.
Thank you, Greg.
Man, thank you so much. Excellent, guys. Well, thank you all for tuning in. We hope you get a chance to try some of this delicious, delicious whiskey. Tune in with us next Wednesday for Whiskey Wednesday. Almost every Wednesday. If we don't make an announcement, we're probably taking that week off. We take every 6 or 7 weeks off so we can catch our breath and get our schedule back up. But guys, please try this if you get a chance, if you're in any of the states where it's available. If not, if you're taking a trip to Colorado, swing in, take a tour, try it out. Stuff is absolutely ridiculous. Take a couple bottles home with you, share it with your friends, and get your local liquor stores to request it because this stuff is nuts. Thank you guys so much. Thank you, Alan. Everyone have a great night and cheers.
Thanks, Greg.